So thanks everyone, first of all, for being here, and thank you to everybody that worked on making this happen and getting me here. I really appreciate it. My name is Yahaira Carillo, and I am undocumented. I'm 26 years old, and I've been in this country since I was 7. When I first came to America, it was because my parents were reunited. My mom was a single mom most of my life, until when I was 7, she received a call from my father saying that, he wanted us to join him in the States, and that's why we came. And that's pretty much the first recollection I have of my father, or what a family looks like or supposed to be like. And since then, I lived in California originally, always focused on school, always did really good in school. I was such a nerd that I went to summer school for fun every single year until they told me I couldn't go anymore. When I was 12, we moved to Kansas City, and that's where I currently live now. And I graduated in 2003. I think it's a blessing that I graduated, because as this documentary states, and it's actually interesting that they have those studies, or, people saying this, my junior year was my hardest year of high school. I had always excelled, always gotten A's. My junior year, my grades plummeted. I was, I think 11 in that class of almost 300 when I was a junior, and my grades dropped. I got C's and D's and F's, and for a mostly A student, that was really just a showing of what was going on in my life, and it was actually a teacher. So I appreciate that this film is dedicated to teachers, because that's really who saved me and who helped me keep going when I didn't really see a reason to keep going anymore. I didn't find a point to graduating high school because I wasn't planning on going to college. That wasn't something in my plans, because I knew that in Missouri I wasn't going to be able to go because I didn't have documentation, because I knew I couldn't afford it. By the time I was in high school, my parents were divorced, and so my mom was a single mom again, and it wasn't something feasible for our family. But I had a teacher who was very dedicated, and I told her of my status because she didn't understand why I wasn't going to go to college. She didn't understand why my grades were dropping, why I wasn't turning in papers, why I wasn't going to class, because I started ditching classes as well. She just didn't, it was uncharacteristic of the student that she knew, and she had known me since freshman year. But I did end up graduating because, I figured that I had worked so hard that I earned it. I was able to bring my grades back up and graduated 11 in my class, got to sit on stage. But also, like the documentary shows, it was just something I was supposed to do. Walking across the stage didn't particularly mean this future or what comes next or all this exciting stuff. I'm going to move out, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to do all these great things. That wasn't what it was going to be, because I was still not planning to go to college because I couldn't afford it. And so I just went, I graduated, and I went home. That was my graduation day. So I think I've had the luck of having really wonderful people come into my life, and that was also the reason why I went to college, because someone told me of a private institution that would be willing to accept me. And so I was able to go. I've since graduated with my associate's degree from a 2-year college, and I've been working on my bachelor's degree. I graduated high school in 2003. I still have 3 more semesters. It's 2011. It's been a long time. But my desire to keep learning, and I want to be a teacher, so my desire to keep learning and eventually give back to others what that one teacher gave to me has really been my inspiration to keep going. But I'm also an activist. I call myself the accidental activist. I wasn't really ever planning on being out here and saying, oh, hi, my name's Yahaira, I'm undocumented. Now you can put a face to the issue. Hello. But now I am, and it's great, and I love it. It's a little scary. But it's an amazing privilege. It's very liberating. I know people don't understand, but when you have to hide who you are, when you are made to be ashamed of who you are, not because of anything you did. I didn't do anything. And honestly, I don't blame my mother either, because all she wanted to do was give her daughter a family. All she wanted to do was give her daughter an education, something she didn't have a chance to do because she only made it to 8th grade. And that's all she wanted. And so I don't blame her. And I thank her. Yes, it's been hard, and we've both suffered. It's been hard. She, there are days that she kicks herself, and that she gets mad at herself, and she cries, and she hopes she could have done something different. But she did the best she could with what she had. And I'm very thankful and very lucky. But I'm also now fortunate to be a part of a movement. The young people that you see on screen are a part of a movement. And it's audacious, and it's quite bold, and some people think that we shouldn't be out here. But being silent is not an option. When people are dehumanizing you, when people think that you're an it, that you're another, you don't have the option to be silent. Not particularly for yourself, but for other people. Because I can perhaps try to rationalize the hate that comes from people sometimes, but what do I say to my 14-year-old sister? What do I say to my 3-year-old sister? And it is unacceptable that they suffer, or that they be made to feel less, because people don't understand that there are things that are beyond our control that have 12 million people in a situation of undocumented status. So with that, I will leave it up to discussion and let Susana introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Susana Muniz, and I became interested in this issue. One, I'm originally from Merida, Yucatan, Mexico, and came here when I was 7 years old. So I had an immigrant experience, but because my mom married an American who knew how to navigate the system and the immigration system, and we were able to get our status through IRCA. So with that, as I was doing my PhD program, I worked in student affairs for a real long time. And I worked with specifically TRIO programs, which help serve first-generation low-income students in college. And so one day I got a phone call in my office about a student that needed our services. And as I was trying to get more information about the student's need, the person in the other line said, well, this person's undocumented. Because the TRIO programs are a federally funded program, we're not able to serve individuals who don't qualify for federal aid. But with that, I said, I speak Spanish, tell this individual I'm a safe person, they can come talk to me, I'd be glad to do this and, use my lunchtime to help the student, because TRIO people are very, picky about documentation and how you spend your time, so I did it during my lunchtime. But the student never showed up, and I started to wonder what ever happened to that student. And so I focused a lot of my research while in my doctoral program about college persistent issues for undocumented students, particularly women. And so Yahaira was explaining about the fact that, she's gone through college. Parents are the major motivators for college persistence for undocumented students. They look at their parents and they sacrifice a lot to be in this country, and they don't forget that. And so they have a lot of responsibility to make sure that education is something they obtain, that they didn't just come here to not obtain a college degree. So that was a big motivator for the students that I studied. Secondly, I think a lot of it has to do how they navigate the college system. There's a lot of stress that comes with that, particularly in places where there's not a whole lot of students that are out about their documentation status, so they don't know who is a safe person, who do they go for support. So when I talked to the women in my study, a lot of them wanted to use the counseling services, but they were too afraid to go and talk to counselors. One of them did go and talk with the counselors, but never talked about her status. And that was the one thing that was stressing her out. And she cried, and we talked about it, because she just said, I couldn't say it. I just couldn't say it. It was just too hard, and I didn't know what to do. And that's what the major reason is of my stress. So there's a lot of things that go on with undocumented students as they navigate the university system. Coping with stress is a major factor of why they don't complete their degrees, as well as the financial burden, because they don't qualify for federal aid. In most cases, they don't qualify for institutional aid. So they're able to, they hustle. They're working 40 hours a week. They're selling food. Their parents are selling food. And with that, I think some of that guilt comes with a lot of students who feel like they're taking away some of their family income to pay for college as well. And that's another thing that they deal with in their stress. So those are some of the issues that I know go on with undocumented college students, but I know you all have questions about the film and about this issue, and I'm going to open it up now for some of the questions that you have.
If you just raise your hand, I'll bring the mic over.
I just want to know what the difference between illegal status and undocumented status is.
Well, I think one of the main things I have to say about that is I believe in the reasoning that no human being is illegal. To say that a person, there are illegal acts, there are not illegal people. There is a big difference. To say that someone is an illegal person is to take away their humanity, their basic right to exist, to rob them of a human identity, of emotions, of feelings, of wanting for betterment, everything that makes a person. You take that away, you just strip it. Undocumented is a status. You lack documentation. You are a person who lacks documentation, and that is literally the situation that we have on our hands. And so you have undocumented people. You don't have illegal people.
I think that's also how immigration has been framed in the media, how immigration has been framed in just popular discourse, is that the term illegal is tossed around, readily in our media, the New York Times. And so I think that sort of normalizes that terminology for many people when we use illegal. But we don't go around saying, illegal Martha Stewart, illegal business people. I mean, that's just something we don't do. But we've been complacent about applying that to a group of people who don't have papers. And so something to think about how immigration is framed in the media, and we need to start questioning those practices and not using them ourselves.
Do we have a question over here?
In the video, I think I mentioned that sometimes they would concerning taxes, where some of these workers would actually, they mentioned that they would pay taxes. Is this actually, do they actually end up having to pay taxes, but then they don't get the full right? So I'm sure if there's someone that's undocumented, you wouldn't pay taxes because that'll, uncover your identity, you'll be found out. But are there situations where the people would pay the government or whatever through their work and everything?
Yeah.
But still, I don't know.
I can say I, for one, have been paying taxes since I was 16 years old. Every single year, by April 15th, my taxes are done. Just like everybody else, I stress about it. Just like everybody else, I wait till the last minute and postmark it by the day it's supposed to be postmarked. That doesn't change. I think what happens is that a lot of people don't know that, honestly, our system perpetuates the practice of using cheap labor. And they do so. How many of you have heard of what's called an ITIN number, an identification taxpayer number? There's about a couple of hands up. So what this is basically is it's a number that is given to you by the Social Security Administration if you do not have a Social Security number, but you have earned money throughout the year. Honestly, who is that number for? Think about it. Who doesn't have a Social Security number but would have an income? So that number is it's not stated, but if you think about it, it's right there. So these people, everyone is supposed to pay taxes, and the taxes go into a pool of Social Security that will never come back to them, of medical benefits that they will never see, of universities that at times in some states do not allow their young people, their children who have been raised in this country, their tax dollars are of no service to them. And the government has established that system. And it is not something new. In previous times, they gave people actual Social Security numbers that were not valid for employment. Their sole purpose was to pay taxes. So it's not the idea that undocumented people don't pay taxes is a complete fallacy. And people need to learn about these kinds of things because our government continues to perpetuate that. And it continues to perpetuate it in other ways. But yeah, taxes are paid every single year. Every family member, every person I've ever known that is undocumented, I think I've met one. I've been in this country for 18 years. I've met one person that didn't pay taxes. And I got on their case. I'll be quite honest. Because I'm like, what is wrong with you? You know, for various reasons, you need to pay taxes. You're here, you need to pay. But everybody else that I've met, and I talk about my status, so people confide in me. Every single person pays taxes. So some people just don't know that that happens.
I just have a comment, not so much a question, to Yahaira. I know that from the stories and from your own story that you're given this ugly face, the bureaucracy, and I know the DREAM Act did not pass. But I want to tell you that there's many, many, many American citizens like myself who support you and have empathy and compassion for this circumstance. And
thank you.
Go, girl.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Stick it to the man.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Since the DREAM Act didn't pass this year, I guess my question is, what is kind of the political plan going forward? Is there going to be a push for it to be reintroduced next year, or kind of what is the plan?
I think what states have been doing now is passing state DREAM Acts. And so, like, I know New York is trying to pass or has passed a state DREAM Act. Maryland is doing the same. So those acts address in-state tuition, and they look very different in many states. So not all act really addresses everything, but all of them really do address in-state tuition policy, so they are eligible for in-state tuition if you're undocumented. I believe New York, what I learned today, is a state that actually addresses pathway to citizenship.
That's actually a new bill that is being discussed right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
But yeah, I think those now it's more on the state, and I know the Iowa Act is out there, and so please keep your eye on that and show some support when this does come up for discussion in our government soon. So
yeah, and at the federal level, I think let's just make one distinction that I think a lot of people don't know about between a local DREAM Act, a state DREAM Act, and the federal DREAM Act. Local DREAM Acts usually are just about in-state tuition, but they are regarding undocumented students, so they're commonly known as DREAM Acts. The federal DREAM Act does not so much address in-state tuition as it addresses legalization and having a path. Because even though local states, local governments have in-state tuition bills, once those young people graduate college, they still can do nothing with their degree. And the federal DREAM Act is the only thing that can change that. So that is one of the main differences. And unlike some people think, the federal DREAM Act does not mandate states to have in-state tuition if and when it passes. It makes it optional. A state chooses whether they want that for their state. But young people would have that pathway to legalization and would be able to, then work and drive and be able to go to universities in states like my home state, Missouri, which most public universities do not accept undocumented students. But it is being discussed. Since it didn't pass in December, it is being discussed yet again, whether to reintroduce it and when and what will it look like and who will sponsor it. All of those conversations are happening in the background, as well as at local levels. Youth organizations are working very much either to pass in-state tuition bills, to keep in-state tuition bills in place. Like in Kansas, they were trying to repeal in-state tuition, and we were fighting against the repeal. And it didn't pass committee, so Kansas is still good, or any, various version of a local DREAM Act. So that's what's happening legislatively.
I also want to point out there's some legislation out there, well, actually policies that already been made. For example, in the state of Georgia, they've passed a policy that they have banned undocumented students to attend any of their colleges in that state. So when you talk about copycat bills, that's one of them that's really deadly for access to college for undocumented students.
Do you have any suggestions for dealing with people who are anti-immigration? Any points of debate, despite also like the tax thing that you said? Do you have any other points that people can make? Because I know a lot of people who are extremely anti-immigrant and very hateful. And I'm always getting into discussions, but any points you can give me would be great.
I think one of the things I love is Representative Waters in this film. She says, you have your different categories of people. You have your hopeless kind, and sometimes we just have to, it's really hard to accept. I, as an activist, have a really hard time doing this. But sometimes you have to accept that there are some people that you should just not waste your breath on. They are just beyond hope and logic and reasoning. We really don't like to come across those types, but at the point that it's making you sick to converse with some people is a point that you should know that perhaps it's not worth it. But then you do have your people that don't know things like taxes, that, don't know what the benefits are. I think one of the things that's really important, there was actually a study that came out last year while this most recent DREAM Act came, that said how much money would these undocumented students contribute to our economy were they to be legalized. It was $10 million. And that's a low estimate based on the numbers that, we have. It's also estimated that a college graduate with a bachelor's degree will make $1 million in their lifetime. I mean, roughly, things cost a lot nowadays, but imagine how much tax you collect on that. And we have to consider also our aging population. It's something that we know is, as far as the baby boomers, they're getting older, they're retiring, what is going to happen to Social Security. And some people don't like Social Security, but it's a part of our culture and our government. And how are you going to continue to get taxes? By having educated workforce who is paying taxes because they're gaining, they're earning more money. So you have to think about it in economics terms as well. And then another thing is that particularly with the DREAM Act, it's so structured for a specific group of people that it's easier for moderates to sort of get their head around. And that's really important to highlight, that it's young people who, I know my Spanish is kind of bad. I'm a Spanish major, but it's better because I'm a Spanish major. And I know other people that don't speak their native languages, whether, I know people who don't speak Korean or who don't speak Chinese or don't speak it well. We've grown up here. This is our home, and this is the only place we want to contribute to. We've already invested thousands of dollars. For example, I came here in second grade. Thousands of dollars have been invested in my education. And I'm a very able-bodied person. I can do tons of things. And so we have to think about an investment that we've already made, and now we are wanting a return. And with the DREAM Act, we are able to get that return on that investment. So that's really, really important.
I think my thing is to focus more on the individuals that are on the fence, the middle of the road, individuals, my next door neighbor, those individuals. And I educate myself as much as possible on Migration Policy Institute has a lot of fact sheets about immigration, and so I'm able to spew out some statistics, But for me, in the research that I do, I'm really interested in focusing more on the institutional policies of universities and colleges. What is President Joffrey's stance on the DREAM Act? We haven't heard anything from any of the regent schools in Iowa. What is that about? And so how do we get individuals at that level to have these conversations about what does it mean for Iowa to have a DREAM Act, and how do these region presidents and community colleges in Iowa feel about that? There's been lots of underground policies, but nothing has been really solidified in terms of undocumented students in-state tuition and policies, admission policies. It hasn't been done. So that's where my focus is on, is just getting more college presidents to speak out on this issue and support it.
Yeah, but another great resource is there's an undocumented youth resource network online, and they can always connect you to studies like Susana mentioned from the Migration Policy Institute, and they update it with every new DREAM Act based on the economy and the costs and everything that's going on. So there are always current versions, just different sheets based on myths and what are the facts, and you can get all that online, and it's dreamactivist.org, and if there's something that you can't find on there, you can always contact them and ask for it, and if we have it, they will more than gladly give that to you. So,
looks like we have time for one or two more questions. Oh, burning question over here. Okay.
Hi. So we often hear the fear about immigrants taking jobs from us. Can you comment on that and express your views on any misperceptions that may be held, or why those fears do exist?
I mean, those are fears that have always been there. It's sort of it's the xenophobia, the fear that, particularly in our economic times right now, as the film indicated, is that we always try to scapegoat, the immigrant, the newest wave of immigrants. And so when we're taking away jobs, these are individuals. When you think about, our produce is at a reasonable price because we pay individuals to pick it at a cheap price. So we are enjoying some of the benefits of the exploitation of immigrants. Now, I don't know, who wants to do that kind of labor, who can do that kind of labor. And so those are the jobs that I feel like, when this rhetoric about taking away jobs, it's really the jobs in construction industries and in working in the fields, in the housekeeping industries that keep the prices that we enjoy at a reasonable level. So I don't know if you want to say more about that in terms of
I think
the jobs that we're the taking away part.
It's always interesting how the rhetoric is always thrown back onto the individual, right? You are an illegal person and you are taking my job, as opposed to it is a system that perpetuates this population's, just keeping them oppressed. It just perpetuates their oppression for the benefit of our country and our economy, instead of blaming people like the employers. And that's a big thing. Employers want cheap labor. They seek it, actively seek cheap labor. And business has a lot of power when it comes to lobbying. And if they want something, they can really, really get it. But the rhetoric is, you're an illegal and you're taking my job, as opposed to my business down the street wants to pay you less because it doesn't want to pay me more and it doesn't want to give me rights. It rather oppress you, but I'm still going to blame you because that's easier. And, it still makes me look better. And also that's just an argument, I think, that is more used to separate people that are in the lower, socioeconomic ladders, used to separate people of different races and pit really culture against culture so that businesses can continue to gain. That's what they want, and that, I think, is very much what's behind this "they're taking our jobs" argument, because first of all, a lot of the immigrant population is in things like housekeeping and construction and in the fields, agriculture. Well, how many people are really willing to do that? And people say, well, if they paid more, I would go and do it. I could have sworn, I think really Colbert tried to do that. Like, I think he said, right. we'll give you guys a job, and if you guys want to come, if you need a job, they'll get you a job out in the field. I think like 10 people applied for it, even if they paid them better. So, that was just kind of a social comedy experiment, but that just kind of shows you the reality of things. So that's an interesting perspective to have as well.
One more question in the back.
Hey, going back a little farther, did your parents find it hard to get you into an elementary school with the documentation you already have to provide?
Well, because of cases like Plyler v. Doe, education is a right for all young people that are in our country. So, I mean, I was 7. I really don't know what documentation they asked for.
Oh, okay. Because registering my children for school, I had to give them social security number. I had to give them a birth certificate. They had to have everything.
But they can't. If you didn't give them that information, they can't deny
They
any
couldn't
child.
deny?
Yep,
Okay.
they can't deny any child in education,
Okay.
K through 12.
And I was
without
just wondering about if you had adequate access to health care as you were growing up.
No.
I mean,
I-
or was it,
I think the only times I saw doctors was when I was getting enrolled into school and I had to have my shots because I was missing a couple of shots. And then I remember going to the dentist perhaps when I was like 10 or 11. That's like really the first time because my parents couldn't afford it, and my teeth were hurting and I needed fillings. So they took me. And then from then on, I can probably count on my hands the number of times I've been to a doctor. Because I have to pay them myself.
you have to pay in cash?
I have to pay in cash.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, no, I don't get free medical care. I mean, I can't. I think I just went to the dentist, and this sounds really horrible, but after I got my fillings when I was a kid, I didn't go back to the dentist until I could afford it myself, which was about 3 years ago.
Okay, so, we really need to... It's great at a college level, and it would be also tremendous at a young level as well to get needed resources to families. So
Yeah, and I think,
That was my point.
healthcare is also an issue that affects across a socioeconomic spectrum, but more so, I mean, when you have families that are sustaining themselves based off of immigrant wages. My parents picked in the fields for a little while when I was a kid, and then they had like 4 jobs, and I still didn't go to the dentist until I was 10. So,
thank you.
no, thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming, and if you could all just join me in thanking Yahaira and Susana too.